So now that we've got a sense of the difference between stocks and flows, and remembering that wealth is a particular type of stock, it's the total value of or volume of all that you own, let's take a look at money. So money is very interesting. Money comes out of a particular set of social relations, which is built on the fact that as a society we all use money. And as a result of that, it has certain properties which make it a very special kind of asset. Now, you know, every time that I get my paycheck, I make some decisions. How much do I want to keep in my checking account? How much do I want to move into savings? How much do I use to pay off some of my liabilities? And I don't just take it all and pay them all off, right? So for example, my home mortgage loan, I've got a very regularized schedule where I pay it off. On the other hand, credit card, I try and pay it off right away. I don't like to hold credit card debt. And so each one of us has our own sort of mechanism or way to take our income, which comes in and then adds to our existing bank balance sheet, our liability and assets sheet, and we make some decisions. Where do we want to put this incoming change? Sometimes there isn't a whole lot of income coming in, and I might make a change in my existing portfolio. So for example, when I was on sabbatical, I made a decision that I would rather take the time to do some writing and not go on full salary. So I moved some money out of, pay attention to that word money, I moved some of my wealth out of my savings account and into my checking account. So all of us are making these adjustments to our total asset portfolio and making decisions about how much of it do we want to hold in this form, which is checking accounts or cash. How much money do I want to withdraw and have in my pocket, right? In that form, which is my savings account. Sometimes some people have money market mutual accounts. How much do I want to put into my retirement funds, my TAA-CREF? How much do I want to put into stock and bond markets? And stock in that sense is something different, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute. So I'm making these decisions about asset portfolio. What is the array of things that I can hold my wealth as? And one of the things I can use is money. So money is an asset, but it's a very special kind of asset. And it has certain properties which make it kind of unique compared to other assets. So let's talk about what these properties are. So I'm going to first talk about the properties of money. Then I'm going to talk about how money is actually created. I don't mean like how do you make money in the ordinary sense of the word, where you and I talk about did you get a job and did you make money? Because what we really mean when we say did you make money is we don't actually mean money. We mean did you make income expenditure model. That's what we actually mean, right? Did you earn an income? Here we mean something very special. So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, before we come to the interest rate, we're going to talk about the demand for money, which is about how do you decide how much of your wealth do you want to hold in the form of money? How much do you want to hold in the form of other assets? All right. So we're going to go through all that. But let's take a look at this thing called money. Here are a few properties of money. The book gives you some sort of discussion of the origins of money and so on. But let's just focus on what we actually use money for, no matter which society we're talking about. And then we'll talk about what it looks like in a contemporary modern capitalist society. So first and foremost, money is the universal medium of exchange. It's what I use to buy stuff. So the key to money is that it is an asset that I can move. I can take it and I can use it to acquire goods, services, or other assets. If I have wealth, so for example, my house, I can't just use my house to pay my hospital bills. I actually have to do something. I can't go to the doctor and say, here's my house, right? I'm expected to use money to pay for things. It's a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account. All of us use money as a way to make sense of our transactions. So for example, when I get my paycheck, the university doesn't tell me I'm going to pay you the equivalent of 6 mortgage payments, 2 boxes of pencils, 15 meals, and 2 Uber rides. It doesn't do that. What it does is it tells me this is what I give you, right? And we all use the same unit of account, and we're all doing this because we all trust that when I take this money and I walk somewhere, nobody's going to look at me and say, wait, what? You're trying to pay me in pencils? No. Nobody's going to look at it and say it's not going to be accepted. It is, in fact, not just accepted, it is legal tender. It is required to be accepted. If somebody refuses to take your money, then some questions would arise about, are they being discriminatory? Why is this happening, right? So overall, what we're beginning to see is that money has this property. It is the universal medium of exchange. It is the universal standard of account. And while by no means the only store of value, it is a store of value, by which I mean that if I don't use the value I have generated in a given year, remember what we call it? If I produce stuff, but I don't go ahead and consume it, if I don't use up the value, we call it savings. So it is not just a unit of account, it is also a store of value, which is that I can hold my savings in the form of money. I can hold my savings in other kinds of forms also. I can hold my wealth in different forms. In general, wealth is a store of value. And I have concerns about whether or not this store of value is going to store the value, right? It's kind of like if you produce food and you have a granary in which you put all the wheat, that's a store of value, right? You've taken all this wheat you produced, you put it there, and you're going to have concerns, what if it gets rot? What if there are rats? What if the roof leaks, right? You're going to get concerned that the value that you store should maintain its value, should be usable in the future. And so we'll see this with money as with anything else, but it's a store of value, and other stores of value have various types of changes that can affect how good a store of value they are. But for example, my TIAA CREF, my retirement funds, they're a store of value. I'm hoping to store this value so that I can retire and use this value, right? How good it is going to depend on the underlying portfolio, whether it holds its value. In the same way, money does, and here's what's really interesting and different about money. Because it is a universal medium of exchange, I can convert that money immediately into goods and services that I need. It has a property, therefore, that we are going to call liquidity. Literally like water, liquid. You can use it right away, it'll just flow. Whereas something like my TIAA CREF or my Roth IRA or the stocks and bonds I might have, I have to go through a bunch of steps. I can't just use them right away. And when I use them, I have to make sure that at the moment that I'm using them, I am able to retrieve some of that value, right? So money has this very interesting property of being highly liquid because it is the universal medium of exchange, because it is universally accepted wherever you go. And it is a store of value. It may not give you as good a return, maybe if you've got interest rates or something in some other store of value, but it is able to be used as you need it right away, right? And so most of us actually are concerned about the liquidity properties of money. And we like to have some money in hand for use in daily transactions. And also just because what if we're worried that I can't get my hand on my wealth when I need it, right? So money has this property of liquidity. And this liquidity property is precisely because it is the universal medium of exchange and the universal unit of account that everybody in society is using. Now, this doesn't mean that money never loses its value. In fact, money can lose its value, and the key way that money can lose its value is inflation. Because supposing money this year, like this is my wealth, and looking at the money I had this year, Think about housing markets. I could have put a down payment on a house. The same amount of money will not be able to get me the same amount of stuff, the same amount of house if housing prices go up. In the same way, I might have certain money in my checking account, but if prices double, that stuff in my checking account will only be able to access or acquire half as much as it did before. Right? So inflation and price changes actually turn out to have an impact on money's ability to be a good store of value. And indeed, in some societies, we're going to see, if you ever come to international political economy, what happens when you got hyperinflation, for example. All right, so continuing with the question of what counts as money, remembering that the money supply for an economy as a whole is the total volume, it's a stock, the total volume of money that is available to be used by people in that economy for purposes of purchases and exchange. That's what it is, right? So it's a point in time measure, it's a volume, which is a stock, right? So we don't talk about the money supply in this year, we talk about the money supply on this date, or at the end of January, or something like that. It's always at a point in time, and it's a volume at a point in time. So there are, of course, given the nature of money, some debates about how to define it. The common measure that's used is called M1, or money one. And M1 is essentially defined as cash, sometimes called cash in hand. It's currency that's not in the banks, not the stuff that's sitting in the vault of a bank, but currency that's in people's pockets with the public, available for them to use. So that's cash in the private sector that's available with people to use, currency. So that's one thing I can use to pay. I can write a check, or I can use my debit card against my checking accounts. So it's the total volume of checking account deposits plus you can also use traveler's checks in that way, because they are supposed to be usable anywhere, though it's quite rare nowadays with the rise of sort of ease with which you can move currency across borders, or that you can just, like when I go to India nowadays, I used to carry traveler's checks ages ago. Nowadays I just use my credit card, right? And it just debits from my bank account. Or I just use my card. If I want cash, I just use my debit card in an ATM machine. Right? So, but traveler's checks, while they have become much less important, is actually out there for people who use them. Plus, there are a variety of some other checkable deposits. So a lot of people have these sort of specialty checkable deposits where, for example, while normally checking accounts don't really give you a ton of interest, you might be able to put stuff in a savings account, but you're allowed to draw checks against it or make withdrawals, but you're only allowed to make a maximum of so much, only 4 times a year, 4 times a month, or maybe you're allowed to write 10 checks in a given month or something like that, right? So you can have some other checkable deposits that you can use, certain kinds of money market mutual funds and so on. This is M1 because there's a sort of slightly fuzzy line around this, especially because I'm interested in how quickly the money supply can increase or decrease. The fuzziness has to do with the fact that it's actually possible. For example, it's very easy for me to get on my phone and move money out of my savings into my checking account. So that while I can't write checks against my savings account, it's actually very easy for me to increase the amount of checking account deposits, amount of money that I hold in my checking account against which I can write checks. Right? So that means that M2 is essentially equal to M1 plus, depending on the rules of the particular economy you're studying, a variety of additional assets, usually some kinds of savings accounts, which are very easy for you to essentially move into checking accounts so that they are what are often called other near monies. Right? So the text, for example, defines this as broad money. It includes savings accounts, money market accounts, other near monies, right? But overall, when we talk about money supply, we're usually going to focus on M1. Right? Depending on the situation and depending on what we're worried about in terms of monetary policy, there may be times when we start focusing on M2 as well. But in general, it's going to be M1 because this, and particularly out of all this, checking account deposits are the single biggest portion of a country's money supply. That's what most people use, whether they're using their Visa debit cards, they're sort of whether they're using going to ATMs, whether they're writing checks, right? Or whether they're doing auto pay by the bank. So, for example, I often use automatic payment systems for my utility bills, but essentially I'm automatically paying against my checking account. So that is the money supply. And so now, since such a big portion of it is checking accounts, let's take a look at how banks actually create checking accounts.